Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The rain in Seattle that night wasn't the polite, drizzling kind. It came down as if someone had turned the faucet of the sky all the way open. Water hammered against the pavement, the sidewalks, and the storefront windows still lit after hours, forming that heavy, familiar sound only those who'd lived through a Pacific Northwest winter would recognize. Elena Hart ran from the parking lot into Aurora Ridge Hospital like someone fleeing from something bigger than fear itself. Her caramel brown hair, usually soft and smooth, was plastered against her face by the rain. Her mascara had streaked into two dark lines trailing down her cheeks. Her worn-out sneakers made a wet, squelching sound every time they hit the floor. She didn't feel the cold. She didn't feel the rain. All she heard was the one sentence repeating in her head from the hospital's phone call. "Your mother went into cardiac arrest." Her mother. Hart stopped. Elena burst through the automatic glass doors, breathless, her hands trembling too hard to properly grip her bag strap. The hospital hallway glared with LED lights, sterile to the point of cruelty, and was full of people trying to steady themselves through moments no one ever wished to face. The air was a mix of antiseptic, the faint perfume of night shift staff, and the distant beeping of monitors. "Phoebe Hart!" Elena nearly shouted as she reached the reception desk. "Which room? I'm her daughter." The nurse looked at her with the weary familiarity of someone used to this kind of panic, yet her tone remained gentle. "ICU, room 7. Dr. Wolf is in charge." Elena didn't know who Wolf was and didn't care. She ran like her legs would stop working if she slowed even a second. When she reached the ICU observation window, she pressed her cold, wet hand against the glass and froze. Her mother was inside. Phoebe Hart, the woman who always said, "It's okay, sweetheart, I can handle it," now lay motionless in a nest of machines. Her once sun-warmed skin had shifted to a weary gray. The hair she used to pin neatly behind her head had fallen loose, scattered across the stark white hospital pillow. Several doctors moved around the bed, quick and precise, but the one who stood out was the man leading them, a tall figure in a white coat draped over dark navy scrubs. He leaned slightly toward the patient, gray eyes focused so intensely that it felt to Elena as though the rest of the world had vanished around him. He looked up just as her gaze met his through the glass. Only a moment, but Elena felt something unnameable. Not comfort, not coldness. Something like gravity. This man knew exactly what he was doing. He was in control, even while standing on the razor-thin line between life and loss. Elena's panic collapsed. Her whole body trembled. She squeezed her hands together and whispered, "Please, please save her." The ICU doors opened just a few minutes later. For anyone else, minutes were nothing. For Elena, they felt like a lifetime. "The heart rhythm is restored," a nurse announced. "Your mother is temporarily stable." Elena broke down instantly, sobs ripping out of her before she could hold them back. Her legs nearly gave way, and she had to lean against the wall. All she could whisper over and over was, "Thank you, thank you." But then a paper was handed to her. A few lines, a few numbers. Estimated emergency and ICU cost, $63,402. She glanced at her phone. Account balance, $389.27. It was as if all strength drained out of her body. She slid to the floor, head in her hands. Not from shame, not from weakness, but from the weight, too much weight, carried on the shoulders of a 29-year-old who'd been holding everything together for far too long. A pair of black shoes, polished, expensive, unlike anything she had ever owned, stopped right in front of her. "Elena Hart?" The voice was low and clear, cutting through the hallway like a metal door opening into the dark. Elena looked up. It was the doctor from the ICU, Adrian Wolf. Up close, he was even more intimidating than through the glass. Tall enough to block the light behind him, broad-shouldered, a sharply defined jaw, as if sketched with precision, and gray eyes. Cold like Seattle skies, yet heavy with the experience of someone who had witnessed far too much pain. "Your mother is stable," he said. "She's past the immediate danger." Elena burst into fresh tears. "Thank you. I I don't know how to. I need you to stand up. His voice was soft enough not to frighten her, yet firm enough that she obeyed. Elena pushed herself upright, unsteady, and Adrian stepped back half a pace, as if to avoid overwhelming her. Please follow me, he continued. Why? I I didn't do anything wrong. That's not what this is about. Adrian's eyes flicked to the bill still clutched in her hand. There's something I need to discuss with you. Confused, Elena followed him into the consultation room. The small space glowed with warm, amber light, a perfect contrast to the harsh white of the hallway. Adrian closed the door, turned around, and under the softer lighting, he no longer looked like the cold deity of the emergency room. He looked like a man about to make a decision he wasn't entirely sure it was right. Miss Hart, he began, fingers interlaced as if he'd rehearsed every word. I'll be direct. I'm not fond of circling around a point. Elena swallowed. Okay? I need a wife. The sentence hit the small room like a stone. Elena blinked, uncomprehending. I'm sorry. What? Adrian met her eyes, unwavering. I need to be married in 3 weeks, and I want you to play the role of my wife for 1 year. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. He continued, voice steady as if outlining a surgical plan. I will cover all your mother's medical expenses, the surgery, ICU, and post-op care. I'll also provide for your living expenses for the next year. When the contract ends, you'll receive a sum large enough to start over. Elena gripped the edge of the table. But why me? For the first time, Adrian paused. A flicker, something like long-buried exhaustion, crossed his face. Because you're desperate enough to accept, he said, and because you won't fall in love with me. Elena froze, breath catching in her throat. There is only one condition, Adrian continued slowly. You are not allowed to fall in love with me. The entire room fell silent. Elena froze at Adrian's words. In that instant, she felt as if she had stepped out of her old life and straight into a movie she never imagined she would be the protagonist of. A strange, frightening movie, absolutely not meant for girls with $389 in their bank account. Adrian didn't rush. He stood still, both hands resting lightly on the edge of the desk, looking like a surgeon explaining a complicated procedure to a patient. Calm, controlled, almost cold. I'll explain clearly, he said, his deep voice falling back into a steady rhythm. I don't act on impulse. Everything I'm about to say has a reason. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to ask why he believed she would listen to him, why he thought she was desperate enough to do something this insane. But her throat was dry, and her heart felt like it was suspended between uneven beats. Adrian continued, I'll turn 35 in 3 weeks. According to the terms of the Wolf Foundation, my family's largest brain research fund, I can only remain in charge if I'm married. Elena frowned. Why is there such a ridiculous condition? My grandfather believed that someone running the foundation needed stability in their personal life, Adrian said. He believed that people with families are more responsible, more thoughtful, more community-minded. That's a pretty outdated assumption, Elena blurted out before she could bite her tongue. Adrian shrugged, neither offended nor agreeing. I don't support it, but I can't change the will of someone who's no longer alive. Elena folded her arms, trying to stay sane in this absurd situation. And if you don't marry before your birthday? Adrian looked straight at her, his gaze sharp like a freshly honed blade. Control of the foundation goes to my uncle. A name slipped out of his mouth with unmistakable disdain. Richard Wolff. Elena didn't know who Richard Wolff was, but the way Adrian said, my uncle, made her picture a man so bad that he wished he'd never have to utter the name. Adrian's eyes flicked toward the small consultation room window as though a memory surfaced. An unpleasant, heavy shadow. Elena, he said quietly, I've dedicated my life to neuroscience, to patients with degenerative brain diseases. The Wolff Foundation isn't just money. It's labs, research models, and young doctors I've trained. In my uncle's hands, all of it will become a financial tool. No humanitarian purpose left. She hadn't expected that behind his icy facade was a conviction strong enough to darken his eyes. Adrian Wolff wasn't emotionless. He was simply accustomed to hiding his feelings behind armored walls. "And you think I can help you keep all of that?" she whispered. "You can," he answered immediately, "if we get married." Elena let out a laugh, a small, shaky one, more hopeless than angry. "You know nothing about me except my name. I'm just a part-time barista and warehouse worker. I have nothing." "Why me?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "Because you're the only person I can trust." The answer stunned her. "Trust me," she shot back. "You just learned my name 10 minutes ago." Adrian took a few steps, then turned back, his gray eyes landing precisely on her rain-soaked face. "You don't want my money," he said. "You don't want fame. You're not trying to force your way into my attention. I saw that when you stood outside the ICU, with fear only for your mother. You weren't performing. You weren't pretending. I need that." She stayed silent. Every word he spoke, however irrational, struck at fear she had never voiced to anyone. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Elena asked, her voice so soft she barely heard it herself. Adrian glanced down at the folder in his hand, not because he needed to read it, but because it kept him from looking at her too long. "1 year," he said. "You live with me, appear with me at foundation events, maintain the image of a married couple. After 1 year, once my leadership is secured, we divorce quietly." Elena leaned back slightly, her mind spinning. "In return," Adrian added, "I'll pay all of your mother's medical bills. Not just tonight, everything." Her heart twisted. "I'll also perform the surgery myself. A heart procedure requires the best surgeon. I'll do it." Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And then he said the last part, the part that made the room tilt like it had been struck by wind. "Nah. I'll pay you $120,000 after the year is complete. Not a cent less." Elena closed her eyes. 1 year, $120,000. Her mother saved. Her life changed. But in exchange, she would step into the life of a mysterious, cold man who might be far more dangerous than he appeared. Elena walked shakily to the small window. On the other side, her mother lay motionless. The woman who had worked 3 jobs to raise her. The woman who hadn't bought anything for herself in 10 years. The woman who always said, "I'm fine, sweetheart," even when she wasn't fine at all. The fluorescent light made her mother's face look weaker than ever. Maybe this was the only way. She turned around. Her eyes were red, but her voice was so steady that Adrian actually held his breath for a moment. "I agree." Adrian did not smile, did not sigh in relief, did not look victorious. He simply nodded, slowly, calmly, as though he had predicted her answer. "Thank you," he said. "You won't regret this." Elena wasn't sure. She only knew that in that moment, her world had shifted, like a small boat pulled suddenly into deep, unreturnable waters. And Adrian, pausing to look at her a few seconds longer than necessary before walking to the door, left her with one final instruction. "Tomorrow morning, your mother will be taken into surgery. I'll be the one performing it." And before he disappeared completely, his voice echoed, deep, cold, yet carrying something strange Elena couldn't name. "Remember the only condition, Elena. You're not allowed to fall in love with me. It's in my grandfather's will." The door closed behind him, and Elena's heart, though she didn't know it yet, had just begun a journey no clause could ever save her from. 3 days after Phoebe Hart's successful surgery, Elena stood in front of the building, where her entire world was about to change. Wolf Tower rose so tall it seemed to touch the clouds, its glass exterior reflecting Seattle's gray sky. The sharp, modern lines of the architecture made it look like a glass blade stabbed into the heart of the city. Beautiful, but distant, almost cold. Not a place meant for someone like Elena Hart. She tightened her grip on the handle of her old duffel bag, the one that held nearly everything she owned. A few changes of clothes, a scarf knitted by her mother, a cheap pair of worn running shoes, and a weight of confusion pressing heavily against her chest. The security guard in the lobby looked slightly surprised to see her, but the moment she said Adrian Wolf's name, he nodded and led her to a private elevator that went straight to the 52nd floor. When the elevator doors closed, Elena inhaled deeply. Her body trembled. Whether from nerves or the overly strong air conditioning, she couldn't tell. The digital numbers climbed higher. 38, 41, 48, then 52. A soft ding sounded. The doors opened, revealing a space Elena had only seen in movies about the ultra-rich. And even the movies hadn't prepared her for the real thing. The penthouse stretched before her like a living painting, floor-to-ceiling glass. Warm amber light glowed against smooth gray stone walls. Seattle's storm-lashed wind and rain raging outside. But in here, everything was as still as the surface of a lake. Elena stepped inside, her shoes clicking lightly against the polished wooden floor. Part of her wanted to take them off, afraid of dirtying the place. Another part of her felt suffocated. No one could truly live in a spot this spotless. No one lived here. They only existed. The living room was so big that her mother could have run laps without needing a treadmill. The sofa was pure white, so white it terrified Elena to even breathe near it. A long bookshelf stood against the wall, but it was nearly empty. Only a few medical textbooks were arranged there, more like decoration than something used. The home was beautiful, flawless, meticulously designed, but it had no warmth, no trace of a life, no photographs, no souvenirs. Nothing except a polished silence that felt almost like an art installation. Elena swallowed hard. This was where Adrian Wolfe lived. One glance told her everything. This was a life no one was allowed to enter. No one could touch. No one was permitted to stay long enough to leave a mark. "You're here." Adrian's voice came from behind her. Elena startled and turned around. He stood at the kitchen doorway, sleeves of a gray dress shirt rolled up, black hair slightly tousled, as if he'd run a hand through it after a long shift. He leaned against the counter, gray eyes fixed on her. In that moment, seeing Adrian Wolfe alongside this ice-cold penthouse, Elena realized the emptiness of this place didn't come from the architecture. It came from its owner. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "It's beautiful." "Most people say it's too big or too cold," Adrian replied, voice flat, though Elena sensed he was watching her reaction closely. She gave a small, awkward laugh. "I guess it is a little bit like that." Adrian didn't deny it. He walked over holding a thick folder. "The contract." He placed it on the coffee table. 18 pages. Read every clause. If anything makes you uncomfortable, tell me. Elena opened the folder. The first page read, "Temporary marriage contract." She inhaled. Clause 1, no sharing a bedroom. Clause 2, no leaking information to the press or social media. Clause 3, must attend medical events, charity galas, and Wolf Foundation press conferences as requested. Clause 4, must maintain the public image of a loving married couple. Clause 5, must reside at the same address. Clause 6, absolutely no interference in each other's private life. Clause 7, and most importantly, printed in bold red ink, no falling in love with the other party. Elena raised a brow. "You really printed it in red." "I want clarity," Adrian said. "You're smart, so I trust you understand why." Elena attempted a smile, even though her chest tightened. "You put that rule because you're afraid I'll fall for you?" "Because I cannot reciprocate," Adrian said slowly, as if it were a truth he had to remind himself of every morning. "Romance distracts people. I don't have space for that in my life." Elena tightened her grip on the folder. For some reason, the word distract stung, but she nodded. "I understand." Adrian studied her for a long moment, too long, as if trying to memorize her expression. "Your room is on the right," he said quietly. "If you need anything, tell me." Elena lifted her duffel bag and walked toward the hallway he indicated. Before entering the room, she glanced back. "How long have you lived alone?" she asked softly. Adrian's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe. No one asked him that. No one dared. "A long time," he answered, then looked away. Elena entered her bedroom. It was larger than the apartment she once rented. A tall window wrapped around the corner, framing Elliott Bay, where coastal lights glimmered faintly through the rain. She set her bag down, sat on the bed, and simply breathed. The room was beautiful, but unbearably quiet. She looked around. Nothing was wrong. Everything was perfect. And that was exactly what made her chest tighten. She sensed her first real truth about Adrian Wolfe. He was lonely. So lonely that the emptiness soaked into the walls, the floors, the mirrors, even the air. A man who had everything, wealth, status, brilliance, yet lived in a world so white and untouched, it looked like no warm hands had ever reached inside. Elena didn't know what she was going to do, didn't know where her life was headed, but she knew one thing for sure. From the very moment she stepped into this penthouse high above the Seattle rain, she would not just play the role of his wife for a year. She would become the only person who saw Adrian not as a brilliant, untouchable doctor, but as a man lost inside a home far too big for his own heart. And that realization warmed her and frightened her all at once. The first days in Adrian Wolfe's penthouse passed like a dream. Elena wasn't sure she should consider a pleasant one or a nightmare. There were no arguments, no clashes, and certainly no intimacy. Just two strangers, accidentally tied together by a legal contract and a silent humanitarian reason. Neither of them spoke aloud. Adrian disappeared from the penthouse for almost the entire day. In the mornings, the only sign that he had ever been home was a still warm espresso cup on the bar counter, placed in the exact same spot as yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. He left for work before the city woke and returned when all of Seattle was deep asleep. Some nights she heard the door open close to 3 a.m., and the sound of a rain-soaked coat hitting the cold stone floor. 70 hours a week. That was his life. A neurologist, exhausted but still pushing forward as if afraid he would collapse if he paused for even a minute. Elena began shaping her own rhythm as well. She applied for a job at the cafe on the ground floor of Aurora Ridge, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she needed to feel like she was doing something for herself. At the cafe, she was Elena, not Dr. Wolfe's wife, not the contract woman, just a girl who made coffee better than necessary and smiled too much at the patients. Regulars quickly grew fond of her. Hospital staff liked her even more, and the young doctors tended to take longer lines whenever she was on shift. One rare, faintly sunny afternoon in Seattle, Elena was wiping the counter when a cheerful female voice burst in front of her. "Oh, so I finally get to meet my future sister-in-law." Elena looked up. A young woman with softly curled dark blonde hair, bright green eyes, and the kind of energy that drags springtime into a tired hospital hallway. She wore a doctor's coat, but still somehow radiated warmth that brightened the space around her. "You are—" Elena blinked. "Lila Wolfe," the girl said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Adrian's sister. And you're Elena. The Elena our whole family found out about so fast we barely had time to process it." Elena flushed. "We, things happened a bit suddenly." "A bit?" Lila burst out laughing. "Elena, you caused a medium-sized earthquake in my family." Elena bit her lip, worried. "Do they hate me?" "No." Lila tilted her head, studying her for a moment. Her gaze was gentle but sharp, the kind of person who saw more than she said. "They're just surprised. And Adrian, well, don't bother analyzing him. He's always like that." "Like that meaning?" Lila shrugged. "Distant, intimidating, always busy and looking like he's silently scolding the entire world in his head." Then she flashed a sympathetic smile. "But he's not a bad person. Adrian just doesn't know how to live, doesn't know how to let anyone into his life. So," she winked, "the fact that you can tolerate him is impressive." Elena laughed for the first time in days. A soft laugh, like water settling after a storm. She liked Lila instantly, a breeze completely opposite from Adrian Wolfe, yet somehow related to him, a miracle in itself. That night it rained again. The annoying kind of Seattle rain, not big enough to be a storm, not small enough to ignore, just persistent enough to make you want to stay home, wrapped in a thick blanket. But Adrian still wasn't home. Near midnight, Elena couldn't sleep. She stood in front of the open fridge, white light shining onto her blank expression. She had never been a good cook, but she knew someone working 18 hours needed a hot meal. She quietly cooked a simple box of meat sauce pasta, the smell of toasted garlic drifting across the too-silent kitchen. The hospital wasn't far. She carried the warm container through the dim hallways, where only the night shift silhouettes drifted by. When she opened the doctor's lounge door, Elena nearly dropped the box. Adrian was asleep on the small sofa. Asleep, or more accurately, collapsed from exhaustion. His head tilted to one side, black hair falling onto his forehead. His white coat was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the gray undershirt beneath. One hand still loosely held a pencil, the other resting on a stack of medical charts sliding off his lap. He looked much younger when he slept. No guarded expression, no sharp, intimidating gaze, no perfect posture of the genius doctor constantly bracing himself against the world. Just a man so tired he no longer had the strength to hide his loneliness. Elena stood there for a long time. She didn't know what the feeling was: sympathy, sorrow, closeness, or something else flickering like a small flame in the night. She set the pasta on the table, so gently it made no sound. Then she pulled the thin blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it over his shoulders. When her fingers brushed the edge of the blanket, Adrian stirred. Half asleep, he frowned like someone resisting sleep out of habit. "Adrian," she whispered. His gray eyes opened, slow and heavy, as if each blink hurt. He glanced around as though unsure where he was. When his gaze finally landed on her, a silent question flickered through it. "What are you doing here?" His voice was so hoarse, Elena wanted to hand him a warm drink on the spot. "I brought you food," she said quietly. "You didn't have dinner, did you?" Adrian looked at the pasta, then back at Elena. A flicker of emotion crossed his face, so faint it was almost nothing, yet enough to make her heart skip. "Thank you," he said it simply, but the way he said it made the words heavier than a long sentence. "You should go home and sleep," Elena said softly. "The human body wasn't designed to survive a schedule like this." Adrian actually smiled, a real smile, even if only a fraction of a second. "I'll let you know when I have free time." "You can say that to anyone else," Elena replied, "but don't say it to the person cooking pasta for you at midnight." Adrian exhaled, the smile fading, but his eyes no longer as bleak as when she first saw him sleeping. "Elena," he said, "I don't know how to live normally. I only know how to work." "I know." Elena's voice was soft, not judging. "But you can learn. Anyone can." Adrian looked at her as if no one had ever told him that before. Elena turned to leave, but when her hand touched the doorknob, she glanced back without thinking. "Adrian," she whispered, "you're not a machine." He tilted his head slightly. "What makes you think that?" "Because machines don't fall asleep," she said, "and they don't need someone to bring them pasta." The door closed quietly behind her. Adrian Wolfe remained seated, tired, worn down, but with something new flickering in his gray eyes. A small spark, a rare warmth, something new and dangerous. Elena didn't see it, but he did. That was the moment everything began to change. A flame had been lit, even if neither of them had realized it yet. The cold Seattle wind brushed against the high-rise windows like a never-ending soundtrack. On the 52nd floor, Elena curled into the corner of the sofa by the window, a thin woven blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she watched the city sink into the night. The scattered lit windows of the buildings below looked like tiny lanterns laid across the ground, beautiful in a way that made the heart ache with loneliness. She heard a soft beep from the electronic lock, followed by the quiet glide of the automatic door. Adrian was home. He stepped inside without a greeting, without the dramatic exhaustion some people carried after a long day. Just one deep, weighted breath, the kind that sounded like an entire day of residence, patience, and charts had stacked themselves onto his shoulders. Elena turned slightly. Adrian's white coat was wrinkled, the top button of his dress shirt undone. The cuffs were stained with antiseptic, and his gray eyes, usually sharp and cold, were so tired they looked like nothing more than a faint outline. She stood up gently. "Have you eaten?" Her voice was as soft as the blanket wrapped around her. Adrian shook his head. "I don't remember." A sentence that made Elena feel both sympathy and exasperation. How someone could be brilliant enough to save lives yet forget to care for himself was baffling. She set her mug of cocoa down and walked closer. "Do you have a little time?" she asked quietly. "Is something wrong?" Elena didn't think. She just felt he needed something tonight. Not working, not polite silence, but a conversation, like two people sharing a life, not a contract. Sit down, Elena said. I'll heat up dinner for you. Adrian hesitated, as if the word dinner didn't exist in his daily vocabulary. But he did sit, leaning back into the sofa with the slow, drained motion of someone who had run out of strength to pretend they were fine. When Elena placed a plate of warm pasta on the coffee table and sat across from him, neither spoke for several minutes. Only the soft rain tapping at the window and Adrian's exhausted breathing filled the room. Then he spoke. Today, I had a case that reminded me of my grandmother. Elena looked up. His grandmother, he had mentioned her briefly once, but never with emotion. She passed away long ago? Elena asked softly. 14 years, Adrian said, eyes fixed on the table. But there are things, even 14 years isn't enough. He tightened his hand slightly, as if holding a memory in place before it scattered. Eleanor, my grandmother, was the person who understood me the most, he continued. His voice was low, deliberate. In a family obsessed with achievements, expectations, board meetings, she was the only one who let me just be a kid. Elena listened as he painted the image of a silver-haired woman who gave him crumbly cookies, who laughed gently when he skateboarded into the wall, who hugged him for a long time when he matched into neurosurgery residency. Then Alzheimer's came, Adrian said. Week by week, month by month, she forgot my name, forgot my favorite foods, forgot the sound of her own laughter. His voice hitched, though he was trying to keep it steady. I watched her disappear in front of me. One day she asked, "Who are you?" Elena pressed a hand to her chest as if her heart had been squeezed too tightly. I couldn't save her, Adrian whispered, so I chose to save others. I thought, if I couldn't keep her here, maybe I could keep someone else's pain from feeling the same. Adrian, Elena murmured, you've done more than that. He didn't respond, but his gray eyes for the first time weren't cold. A while later, when the pasta had gone halfway cold, Adrian spoke again. Elena, I once loved someone. Elena blinked, her heart skipping a beat for reasons she didn't fully understand. During residency, she asked. Adrian nodded. We were together for 2 years, but she told me I only loved my work, that I didn't know how to give. How do we need anyone? How to love anyone besides my patience? A strange anger flared in Elena's chest. Not jealousy, but the knowledge that someone had carved that wound into him, and he had carried it ever since. She was wrong, Elena said firmly. Maybe. Adrian gave a small shrug, part resignation, part self-mockery. But after that, I figured, maybe I'm not meant to have someone beside me. It's not that you're not meant for it, Elena replied softly. You just trusted the wrong person. Adrian looked at her, as if her words had quietly unlocked a door he didn't know he'd kept shut for years. Adrian's story spilled out like a stream finally finding its path. One topic drifted into another. He asked Elena about her mother, about her childhood in a wind-whistling trailer home, about the dreams she folded away to make room for bills, about her first job at 14, standing behind an ice cream counter and getting frostbite from the machine. Elena laughed as she told him, Back then I thought, if poverty were a sport, I'd probably win a medal. Adrian laughed, not loudly, but genuinely, a sound rarer than July sunshine in Seattle. You're strong, Adrian said. No. Elena shook her head. I'm strong because I had no other choice. The strongest people are usually the ones who have to be strong to survive. He looked at her as if seeing something he had never taken the time to look at closely, as if she wasn't just the woman living with him under contract anymore. Their conversation ended just before 1 a.m. Elena gathered the 2 cups and stood up. Good night, Adrian. Wait, he said gently. Elena turned. He stood under the soft, golden lights of the living room, hair falling over his forehead, his shirt rumpled in a way that made him look less cold, less distant. What is it? Elena asked. Adrian opened his mouth, then stopped. He exhaled as if releasing a heavy secret. Elena, he said quietly, you make this house less cold. Elena froze. The sentence was barely more than a breath, Yet it struck through the wall she tried so hard to keep between them. Not flirtation, not affection, but the first words that managed to slip past the armor he'd worn for years. "Thank you," Elena whispered. Her voice was so soft it almost disappeared. Adrian lowered his eyes as if afraid someone might witness the emotion he'd let slip. "Good night, Elena." "You too." She retreated to her room, her hand trembling as she closed the door. The room was dark, but her heart glowed, beating so fast it scared her. Because at that exact moment, Elena knew. She was beginning to break the most dangerous clause in the contract, and in the thick armor of Adrian Wolfe, a tiny crack had appeared, and it was spreading. Christmas morning in Seattle always held a pale silvery light Elena had never seen anywhere else, like the world had been wrapped in a giant sheet of gift paper, carefully tucked beneath the mountains. This year, for the first time in her life, she would walk into a Christmas not spent in a small house, with wind whistling through the cracks, but inside the Wolfe family's old mansion, sitting right beside a lake still as glass. And that alone made her want to turn around and run. The black SUV rolled slowly down a snow-lined road, the rows of tall pines casting long shadows like pillars leading into a world of luxury, but also coldness. The mansion emerged through the mist, grand, old, dignified, and carrying a kind of beauty that was breathtaking and intimidating. "Just breathe evenly," Adrian said quietly, eyes still on the road. Elena swallowed. "I'm breathing fine." "Count from 5 to 1 in your head," he replied. "My mother tends to have that effect on people." "You sound like you're taking me to an interview, not a Christmas party." "I used to feel the same way," Adrian admitted. "So, I understand." That sentence, gentler than anything Jenny had ever complained he was incapable of, caught Elena off guard. Maybe this was one of those small moments that proved he did have softness in him, just rarely shown. Margaret Wolfe stood at the door in an ivory cashmere cardigan, her gaze sharp as a blade. She had the kind of powerful beauty belonging to someone accustomed to living on society's highest floors. Silver hair, neatly pinned up, elegant features, and a voice soft enough to make people uneasy. "Elena." She lightly touched Elena's hand, a gesture more polite than warm. "I finally get to meet you." "I'm very happy to be here, Mrs. Wolfe," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret's eyes flicked from Elena's head to toe, taking in the soft brown knit dress Adrian had said matched the winter lake, and the warm but non-designer boots. A flash of assessment passed, not rude but sharp enough for Elena to feel it on her skin. "Where did you say you worked?" Margaret asked as she led them into the grand foyer. "I work at the cafe on the ground floor of Aurora Ridge Hospital." Ah, only one syllable, yet packed with more meaning than a full paragraph. "A very interesting job." Elena smiled, though something inside her pinched. "I enjoy it." "And your family?" Margaret asked, pouring tea as if conducting a demographic survey. "My mother is my only family. I lost my father when I was 8. Margaret paused, not with sympathy, but with notation. "Your education?" "I attended community college for a while, but had to leave to work. I want to go back someday." Margaret nodded, her pale gray eyes unreadable. "I see. A rather unconventional path." Adrian cut in abruptly. "Mother, none of that is relevant today." Margaret's lips curved faintly. "Of course. I just want to understand my son's wife." Elena felt Adrian's hand brush lightly against her back, an unspoken apology. That evening, the massive dining room glowed with white candles and pine garlands. The Wolfe family sat around the long gold-trimmed table. Margaret, the grandparents, Lila, who was the only one defending Elena whenever their mother's gaze sharpened, and Adrian sitting beside her but close enough that her heartbeat wouldn't behave. They had to act. She knew it. He knew it. But every time Adrian set a hand on the back of her chair, poured her water, or brushed her fingers under the table, those moments felt so real they made Elena question herself. Was she acting, or slowly coming to believe the role she played? Margaret watched them like a camera operator analyzing every frame. "Elena," she asked, raising her glass of red wine, "what do you like most about Adrian?" Elena nearly choked, but Adrian squeezed her hand under the table, a signal. She inhaled and smiled. He listens, Elena said. No matter how busy he is, he still asks how my day was. That is rare. Margaret lifted an eyebrow, while Lila stifled a laugh, clearly enjoying the romantic moment. Adrian looked at Elena as she spoke, a look she couldn't hold for long, afraid her heart might slip a beat right onto the floor. Later that night, the problem arrived. Sorry, Elena, Lila said, tilting her head apologetically. The house is packed this season. We're out of bedrooms. Elena blinked. So where do I sleep? With Adrian, Lila said casually. Share the bed. Left side for you, right side for him. And between you two. A row of pillows, Adrian cut in. Deadpan. Elena swallowed. Of course. The room they were given was big enough to hold her old apartment. A king-size bed with deep red velvet covers, soft golden lamps, and a window overlooking the lake, shimmering silver under the moon. They stood on opposite sides of the bed like two soldiers dividing territory. I'm not going to touch you, Adrian said first, sounding tense. You say that like I'd be scared. You should be. Elena let out a small laugh. Good night, Adrian. They got into bed, a row of pillows between them, but Elena could still feel his breath in the dark, warm and closer than she expected. You asleep? Adrian's voice drifted through the darkness, low, tired, but strangely soft. Not yet, Elena answered. He was quiet for a moment, a silence so still she could hear her own heartbeat. My grandmother brought me to this lake the first time when I was 6, Adrian said. It snowed so heavily that everyone said we shouldn't go. But she said, some memories can only be made in one season. Elena turned slightly toward him, though she couldn't see him clearly. I was terrified of ice, terrified of falling. She held my hand, guided me one step at a time, like she was telling me that if someone is there, falling isn't the end of the world. His voice softened. I wish I could go back to that day. It's the last time I remember her laughing that hard. Elena didn't know why her eyes stung. In the dark, Adrian wasn't cold at all. He hurt so deeply he needed coldness to survive. Thank you for telling me, Elena whispered. Adrian let out a faint breath, like acknowledgement, like he was letting her take one small step past his armor. Elena pulled the blanket up to her chest, staring at the thinning darkness over the lake. Her first Christmas with the Wolf family didn't have sparkling snow, soft music, or movie-perfect moments. But in that dark, luxurious room, with Adrian's unguarded pain hanging quietly between them, she felt she was seeing his real self for the first time. And that, in a way both beautiful and dangerously fragile, made her heart tremble. The morning after Christmas always carried a vague kind of silence. The Wolf Lakeside estate sat wrapped in early fog, everything so still that Elena could hear the faint crackle of the porch roof as the sun touched the thin layer of frost. She was folding scarves when Margaret Wolf appeared at the end of the hallway. Not with a sharp click of heels or a loud call, but with a cutting presence that made the air fall a few degrees colder. Elena, follow me, she said. Not angry, not annoyed, but cold enough to chill the entire living room. Elena followed her down the long, wood-paneled corridor, past antique paintings she didn't dare look at too long because it felt like they judged every step she took. Margaret's private office sat at the very end, a grand imposing room where ebony wood, crystal, and warm golden light combined into something both elegant and unforgiving. Margaret sat behind her desk without inviting Elena to sit. Her gaze was so cold, Elena immediately straightened, her hands tightening together instinctively. We need to have an honest conversation, Margaret began. Her voice was soft but sharp as a freshly honed scalpel. Elena nodded. Yes, ma'am. You're a sweet girl, Margaret said. Polite, humble, but those traits don't make you suitable for Adrian's life. She placed her hand lightly on the desk, as if discussing the weather, but every word landed on Elena like stone. I don't judge you for your background, she continued, eyes never leaving Elena. What I care about is the consequence of you being near him. You will ruin what Adrian has built. You will pull him away from the path he must stay on. Margaret opened a drawer, took out a soft black leather checkbook, and wrote a few lines in handwriting so elegant it was hard to believe it belonged to someone who just stabbed straight into another person's heart. She tore the check and set it on the desk. The amount was unmistakable, $300,000. Elena felt the entire room grow heavier. That number could clear all her debts, secure her mother's future, buy back every dream she had folded up and hid in a drawer years ago. It was an escape hatch, but not one meant for a heart. "This is the best opportunity you'll ever get," Margaret said slowly. "Take it. Leave Adrian. No trouble, no noise, no trace." Elena stared at the check. 1 second. 2. 3. Margaret Wolfe thought Elena was wavering. Perhaps she believed a girl who made coffee and worked night shifts would see $300,000 as an entire universe. But Elena didn't bend to pick up that piece of paper. She lifted it delicately between 2 fingers, looked at the number one last time, then set it back on the desk, lightly but firmly, as though closing a door. "I don't sell my feelings," Elena said. Her voice didn't shake, not the way she'd feared. Not loud, not defiant, just true. Margaret leaned back slightly, her stare icing over by a degree. "Don't be naive, Elena." "I'm not naive, ma'am," Elena replied. "I know who I am. I know what I want. And I'm not leaving Adrian for anyone's money." Margaret looked ready to say something more, but Elena bowed her head, closed the door behind her, and walked down the hall before her stomach dropped entirely. She moved quickly until she found the restroom at the end of the corridor, slipped inside, locked the door, and leaned back against the cold tiled wall. Everything she'd held upright moments earlier collapsed all at once. Her throat tightened, her breath broke. She covered her face with both hands and the tears came without warning. She cried like she hadn't cried in years, for the humiliation of being treated like a gold digger, for the pain of having to prove her worth in a world that didn't want her in it, for the exhaustion of performing the role of a perfect wife when her heart didn't know where it was supposed to go. But when the tears reached her wrists, Elena realized something that hurt more than anything Margaret had said. Margaret might have seen Elena as the problem, but she wasn't wrong about the most important part. Elena was no longer indifferent, even though she shouldn't be, even though the contract was clear, even though logic told her to stop. In the pitch-black quiet of the white-tiled room, Elena pressed a trembling hand against her chest, where her heart was pounding so hard she felt it in her bones. And for the first time, she whispered the truth meant only for herself. "I'm in love with him." She loved Adrian Wolfe, loved the way he hid his pain behind cold stone, loved the silent hurt in his eyes, loved the most complicated, lonely man she had ever known. And in that moment, in a bathroom far too luxurious for a life like hers, Elena understood one thing. Nothing from here on would be simple again. Elena stepped out of the bathroom with her eyes still a little wet, though she had wiped them completely before opening the door. She didn't want anyone to see that vulnerability, least of all Adrian. She told herself she could blend back into the crowd, find Lila, and pretend everything was normal until she left the mansion tomorrow morning. But when she stepped into the hallway, Adrian was there. No coat, no polite smile, just an expression she had never seen before. Worry mixed with anger, as if he had run through half the mansion looking for her, and only the sight of her standing there, unharmed, allowed him to breathe again. "Elena," his voice dropped, lower than usual. "What did my mother say to you?" She inhaled softly. "It's nothing. Not important." "Elena." He took a step closer, his gray eyes sharpening like wet steel under rain. "I saw you run. You wouldn't look at me. You hid. Don't tell me nothing happened." She turned away, but Adrian touched her arm just lightly. Yet it was enough to keep her from walking past him, like an invisible pull she couldn't break. "What did she do?" he repeated, voice no longer controlled. Elena closed her eyes. She didn't want to say it. Didn't want him and his mother turning into enemies because of her. But Adrian Wolfe was too intelligent to let anything be hidden from him for long. "She gave me a check." Her voice was so small that only he could hear it. "To make me leave you." Adrian froze, no movement, no breath. Then suddenly he said, each word forced out like it cost him pain, "I will not allow her." "Adrian," Elena cut him off, lifting her gaze to meet his. "It's not your fault. I'm the one who has to face it." His eyes softened only for a second. "Did you cry because of her?" number. She wanted to say it, but the thing lodged in her throat wasn't the sting of Margaret's insult. It was something else. Something she was afraid to admit. Something she had held back through every late-night conversation with him. Every moment she watched him fall asleep from exhaustion. Every time he accidentally let her see the scarred heart he carried. Elena stepped back until her shoulders met the wooden wall. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff with only one way forward. The truth. "I broke the rule," she whispered. Adrian stilled. "What rule?" "The most important term in the contract." Her breath trembled, not from the cold, but from fear he might turn away once he heard it. "I love you." A silence fell between them. Dense, explosive, but soundless. Adrian looked at her, not as the genius neurologist, not as the disciplined man who controlled everything in his life more strictly than a soldier, but as someone completely undone. "Elena," he said her name like it had become a prayer. She clasped her hands against her chest, forcing herself to finish what she had held back for so long. "I know I'm not allowed to. I know it's wrong for you, wrong for the contract, but I tried to stop it. And I can't anymore. I love you, Adrian. She didn't finish. He stepped forward, gripping her shoulders as if he needed proof she was real. "Don't apologize," Adrian burst out, his voice hoarse, strained. "Please don't." "You—" "Elena," he murmured, leaning down until his forehead nearly touched hers, his breath hot in the cold hallway. "I want you." Her eyes widened. "And I'm more afraid of that than any surgery I've done in my life." Elena's heart pounded so hard she couldn't tell if the sound came from her chest or his. Adrian, always calm, always controlled, always building walls higher than the penthouse windows he looked down from, was confessing something she had never dared hope for. "I don't want to love anyone again," Adrian said, voice soft but wounded. "I've lost too much. I know love can take away what I have left." He lifted a trembling hand to her cheek. "But with you, I can't stop it." Elena couldn't breathe. She didn't know who reached for whom first. All she knew was that the moment Adrian lowered his head and their lips met, everything shattered. Their first kiss wasn't gentle. It was a storm breaking after too long a silence. It was every night he watched her from afar, every moment she pretended not to stare at him too long, every piece of pain and loneliness buried in both of them, and the raw truth they had both feared. They belonged to each other. Adrian pulled her into his chest, the kiss fierce enough that Elena gripped his shirt, afraid her legs wouldn't hold her. His warmth filled every hollow inside her, hollows she thought nothing could ever reach after a lifetime of unexpected blows. When he finally pulled back just to breathe, his forehead stayed pressed to hers, his voice a confession carved out of the deepest part of him. "Elena, you make me want a different life." She choked on a breath. "Adrian." "And if loving you is breaking the rule," he whispered, "then I don't care about the rule anymore." Outside the hallway, snow began to fall, soft flakes tapping on the Wolf Mansion windows, silent witnesses to the moment. But inside that room, between two people who had built walls around themselves for far too long, something collapsed, opening a door they could never close again. That night, the wall between them fell completely. The next morning, Seattle was washed in its familiar silver-gray hue, and Elena could still feel the lingering warmth of last night's kiss on her lips. Something inside her had opened, like she had finally found direction after so many days of trying to deny it. Adrian hadn't just kissed her. He had let her see a part of himself he hid from the world. He wanted her, feared her, chose her. That alone was enough for Elena to wake up with a heart as light as a petal. She found Lila in the kitchen around noon, just as the house was quieting down from departing guests. Lila was making tea, hair tied high, her face bright as always. But when she spotted Elena, she tilted her head and smiled with a mischievous, knowing expression. "Our future sister-in-law looks very different from last night." "Oh, shut up," Elena muttered, blushing. "What do you want?" "Oh, plenty," Lila said, ripping open a sugar packet. "I need to ask you something. Last night, my brother looked like he'd been standing in front of a fireplace without a shirt. Something happened, didn't it?" Elena bit her lip, unable to force out a word. Lila laughed. "No need to say anything, I can tell. Adrian has never looked at anyone like that. Elena was about to change the subject, but Lila suddenly leaned forward as if remembering something. Oh, by the way, don't worry about the will anymore. Elena froze, went, what do you mean? Well, the clause in the will, Lila shrugged. There's no such thing as no falling in love. I don't know who told you that, but my grandpa's will is simple. Adrian just has to get married before he turns 35 and stay married for at least 5 years. That's it. 5 years. Elena felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. You mean, if he divorces before 5 years, then he loses control of the foundation, Lila said casually as she sipped her tea. So of course, Adrian is terrified of love. You know how it is. Love has no guarantees. Who would gamble their career, their entire life, on a feeling you can't control? Elena heard every word, but her heart felt squeezed. The clause. You cannot love me. It wasn't in the contract. It wasn't in the will. It wasn't a rule anyone imposed on him. It was Adrian's fear, the fear of being left behind again, the fear of losing everything because someone walked away, the fear of loving someone so deeply that he'd lose himself if they disappeared. Elena gripped the edge of the counter so she wouldn't shake. In that instant, everything became painfully clear. Adrian wasn't cruel, wasn't emotionless, wasn't trying to cage her with rules. He was a man who'd once loved and been hurt down to the root, so much that he built a wall high enough to keep the world out, including himself. She left the estate half an hour later, calling an Uber straight to Aurora Ridge Hospital. No hesitation, no second guessing. For the first time in years, her heart, not fear, guided her steps. The hospital chapel sat nestled between two specialty wings, a small garden around it, a glass dome ceiling, rows of simple wooden pews, and soft afternoon light streaming through the tall windows in long strips across the floor. Elena stepped inside and saw Adrian immediately. He stood alone in front of the glass wall, his white coat off, arms folded, posture taut like a drawn wire. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, she saw it, raw, unguarded worry. Elena, he stepped forward. You left without saying anything. Are you okay? What did my mother say to you this morning? It's not about your mom, Elena said, her voice trembling. This is about you. Adrian slowed. The worry in his eyes shifted into something deeper, like he sensed a storm forming in the room. Elena, he said softly, you're shaking. Because I know, she whispered. The real clause in the will. Adrian stopped moving. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe deeply. He just froze, as if someone had turned him to stone. It wasn't about love, Elena continued. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about any rule you're bound to. He closed his eyes for a moment. It was the first time she had ever seen Adrian Wolfe look afraid. You wrote it yourself, Elena said gently. The rule not to love, because if you love someone, they can leave you. You can lose everything. You can be hurt the same way again. Elena, Adrian, her voice cracked. You're not cold. You're hurting. He opened his eyes, and the gray in them was so deep she wanted to wrap her arms around him instantly. Elena. He moved half a step closer, then stopped, as if touching her would make everything collapse. His hands trembled, for the first time. In every moment she had seen him strong, steady, immovable. This was the only time his armor cracked open. She lifted her chin and spoke with everything left in her heart. I'm not going anywhere. Adrian sucked in a shaky breath, like a drowning man resurfacing. Elena, he whispered, I don't know how to keep you without losing myself. You don't have to keep anything, she said, stepping forward until their breaths mingled. Just let me stay. Something inside Adrian dimmed and brightened at the same time. He lifted his hand, but paused midway, trembling slightly. Elena took his hand and placed it over her heart. I'm here, Adrian, and if I ever leave, it won't be because of the will, or the money, or fear. It will only be because you didn't want me. His eyes opened, and the trembling in them became the answer. I want you, his voice broke. So much I don't know what to do with it. Elena smiled through her tears. Then I'm not going anywhere. The chapel fell silent. His heartbeat thudded like a vow against her palm. And Elena knew the kiss had shaken the wall. But this moment, under the small glass dome filled with afternoon light, was when the wall truly collapsed. Adrian brought Elena back to Seattle after the night had fully settled in. A thin layer of snow covered the sidewalks, and the streetlights reflected off it like thousands of tiny mirrors. She thought they would return to the penthouse, try to reclaim some sense of peace after a long day. But when the car turned onto the road leading to the Wolf estate, Elena understood immediately. He wasn't going to let this fade quietly. Adrian, you don't have to do this, she whispered. He didn't look at her, but his hand tightened on the gear shift. There are things I need to say myself. I'm not letting you face this alone anymore. Margaret was in the living room, sitting by the fireplace, wearing the composed expression of someone who deeply believed she was right. But when Adrian opened the door and walked straight in, Elena saw her shoulders flinch, as if she had never seen her son carry a storm in with him like this. Mother, Adrian said, no detours, no polite formalities. I know what you did. Margaret set her wineglass down. I only wanted to protect you. No, he cut her off, his voice sharp enough to make the room feel smaller. You humiliated Elena. You treated her like something that could be bought. That's not protection. That's hurting the person. His breath faltered for a split second. The person I need. Elena stood behind him, her heart tightening as she watched the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't angry in an explosive way. He was angry, like someone who had endured for too long and had finally chosen to push back. Margaret inhaled deeply. Adrian, you don't understand. You've already lost so much. If you choose wrong again, this time I'm not choosing wrong. He stepped forward, his gray eyes turning to steel. I know exactly what I'm doing. Mother, I love her. The room stilled, as if all the air had been pulled out of it. Elena felt her heart stop. Margaret stared at her son as though he had just spoken something impossible. Adrian, I love her, he repeated, calmer now but no less fierce. And if you try to tear us apart again, you will lose me in the most literal sense. Elena drew in a soft, uneven breath, not out of fear, but because she had never seen Adrian fragile and unbreakable at the same time. He looked like a man fighting not only his mother, but every old wound still gripping his heart. Margaret looked at Elena, truly looked, for the first time without disdain, but with genuine confusion. My son, she whispered, you've never said that about anyone. Because I've never loved anyone enough to fear losing everything, Adrian said. Then he turned to Elena, and his eyes softened in a way that made her whole chest feel weak. But now I do. Elena didn't even have time to react before he reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, a declaration louder than any speech. And I won't let anyone hurt her, not even you. Margaret said nothing more. The room settled into a heavy silence. Elena saw the woman's shoulders sag slightly, like she had just lost a battle against something she could never control, her son's heart. Adrian squeezed Elena's hand, gently but with absolute certainty. Elena understood. This was the first time he had ever fought for her, and his heart had already chosen, so clearly it could never lie. Seattle in the early morning always carried a strange gentleness, as if the city were hesitating between night and day. Rain clung to the windows as a thin layer of mist, and the smell of coffee from the cafe on the hospital's ground floor drifted into the air. Elena arrived exactly at 7, her steps slightly shaky because she had no idea why Adrian had called her in on such a cold Monday morning. When she pushed the door open, she froze. The cafe was completely empty, no staff, no customers. The whole room was so quiet she could hear the rain outside. Only Adrian sat at their usual corner table, fingers wrapped lightly around a steaming cappuccino, his gaze fixed on Elena, as if he had been waiting there his entire life. Elena glanced around, suspicious. Did you rent out the whole place? Adrian stood, adjusting the collar of his dress shirt. I asked them to take a 30-minute break. For what? For this. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a small blue velvet box. Elena felt her heart drop straight to her stomach. No. No way. Not on a damp, rainy morning. in their usual cafe, with him looking at her with eyes both anxious and unbearably tender. Adrian opened the box. A gold ring gleamed inside. Simple, elegant, the kind of beauty that felt meant for her hand. Not the flashy brilliance of the wealthy, but the warm glow of a genuine promise. "Elena," he began, his voice low and slightly hoarse, as if his heart had been racing all night. "The first time you married me, it was out of necessity, because circumstances forced us to stand next to each other." He paused, a faint, almost self-aware smile lifting his lips. "I understand that." Elena swallowed, palms growing damp. She didn't dare breathe too loudly. "But this time," Adrian inhaled, his gray eyes pulling her in like a magnet. "This time I want you to marry me because of love, because of me, because of us. No contract, no conditions, no fear." Then he got down on one knee, right there, in the empty cafe. "Will you marry me because you love me?" Elena never remembered whether she answered with words, with tears, or with a trembling nod. All she knew was that when Adrian stood and pulled her into his arms, everything heavy in the world dissolved, leaving only warmth, heartbeats, and the sound of rain outside, like delicate applause. 2 weeks later, in the small chapel at Aurora Ridge Hospital, they held their real wedding ceremony. Warm light filtered through the stained glass windows, scattering rainbow patches across Elena's thin veil. She didn't wear a princess gown, just a simple, soft white dress that reflected exactly who she was, gentle but resilient. Adrian stood waiting at the end of the aisle, his black suit fitting him perfectly. When she approached, he smiled. A rare, precious smile from a man who had lived behind iron walls for years. Elena's mother attended. Her eyes were red the entire time. Lila beamed brighter than the flowers along the aisle. A few of Adrian's colleagues came with heartfelt congratulations. And then, as the reception began, Margaret walked in. No announcement, no theatrics. Just a quiet entrance, a touch to her pearl necklace, and a long look at Elena. Adrian squeezed Elena's hand, ready to defend if his mother hurt her again. But Margaret only said softly, "Welcome to the family." Elena couldn't believe her ears, and Adrian exhaled so noticeably she heard it. When it was time for the vows, Adrian took both of Elena's hands, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. A new habit he seemed to have adopted. "You taught me that love isn't a weakness," he said in a deep, sincere voice that made her heart constrict. "It's what remains when everything else breaks apart. And I want to hold on to that. With you." When their lips met, applause burst through the little chapel, as if the entire world were smiling at their moment. 1 year later, Elena found joy working at the Wolf Community Clinic as a patient support coordinator. The work was light, compassionate, and felt like her way of giving back to the hardships that shaped her. She helped patients complete forms, connect with financial aid programs, and everyone adored her sincerity. The penthouse no longer had the cold, glassy emptiness it once held. Elena had brought warmth into every corner, warm lights hanging around the living room, bookshelves filled with her favorite reads, a soft rug by the sofa, and countless photos of them. Smiles, awkward snapshots, rainy days, late-night ramen, because Adrian's cooking lessons had gone terribly wrong. Adrian had reduced his hours, no more 70-hour weeks, because he had finally learned something important. Life wasn't only the hospital. He wanted to come home, home to Elena. One drizzly Seattle evening, they stood together on the balcony. The city below shimmered like stirred water, and Adrian wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her against his chest. "You know," he murmured into her hair, his voice blending with the rain, "I used to think I needed a fake wife to keep my career safe." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "But turns out, I needed you to keep my heart safe." Elena turned, smiling, and pressed her lips softly to his, a kiss warm and gentle as the golden lights inside their home. Under the Seattle rain, with the glow of skyscrapers reflecting around them, they were no longer two strangers bound by a cold contract. They were a family, a true home built from love, from old wounds, and from choosing each other every single day. And Elena knew this was only the beginning.